Presidential blunders: lessons from U.S. history. Throughout more than 2 centuries of U.S. history, presidents have faced significant errors. From President James K. Polk, who expanded American borders through war, to James A. Garfield, assassinated mere months into his term, each leader has left a legacy marked by both achievements and controversies. Let us delve into the most consequential mistakes of these U.S. presidents. Behind symbols of unity and strength lie stories of profound misjudgments. These errors, while often overshadowed by triumphs, have shaped the course of American history in significant ways. In this journey through time, we will explore how each president's decisions, for better or worse, have left an indelible mark on the fabric of the nation. Join us as we uncover the lessons from these presidential blunders. James K. Polk, the 11th president, is remembered for his expansionist policies. His tenure saw the annexation of Texas and vast territories after the Mexican-American War. The war expanded the nation's borders but was controversial and costly. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ceded large portions of Mexican territory to the U.S. Polk's war remains contentious, highlighting the complex consequences of expansion. Zachary Taylor, the 12th President of the United States, was a man of principle and a career military officer. His presidency was marked by his refusal to compromise on slavery's expansion into new territories. Taylor's rigid stance exacerbated the nation's growing sectional tensions. His unwillingness to support the Compromise of 1850 pushed the nation closer to civil war. The compromise, passed after Taylor's death, included California's admission as a free state. Taylor's inflexibility highlighted the dangers of rigid leadership contributing to the path towards civil war. Millard Fillmore, the 13th President of the United States, is often remembered for his support of the Compromise of 1850, particularly the Fugitive Slave Act. This legislation required that escaped slaves be returned to their owners, even if they were found in free states, and imposed heavy penalties on those who aided runaway slaves. Fillmore's endorsement of this act had far-reaching and deeply divisive consequences. The Fugitive Slave Act galvanized abolitionist sentiment in the North, turning previously indifferent citizens into active opponents of slavery. It also led to increased tensions between northern and southern states, as many northerners were outraged by the federal government's enforcement of what they saw as an unjust and immoral law. Fillmore's support for the Fugitive Slave Act was driven by his desire to maintain national unity and prevent secession. However, the act only served to deepen the nation's divisions and hasten the approach of the Civil War. Fillmore's decision to support the act remains one of the most controversial aspects of his presidency. Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States, is often remembered for the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This legislation allowed settlers to decide on slavery, nullifying the Missouri Compromise. The act led to widespread violence, known as Bleeding Kansas. It further polarized the nation, deepening the North-South divide. Pierce's support for the act remains controversial, highlighting the impact of presidential decisions. James Buchanan, the 15th President of the United States, is often remembered for his failure to prevent the secession of southern states and the onset of the Civil War. Buchanan's inaction and indecisiveness during this critical period solidified his legacy as one of the weakest presidents in American history. Buchanan believed that the federal government had no authority to prevent states from seceding, and he took a passive approach to the growing crisis. His refusal to take decisive action allowed southern states to secede with little resistance, leading to the formation of the Confederacy and the outbreak of the Civil War. Buchanan's inaction also undermined the efforts of those who sought to preserve the Union and prevent conflict. His failure to address the secession crisis effectively left his successor, Abraham Lincoln, with the monumental task of navigating the nation through its darkest chapter. The consequences of Buchanan's failure to act were profound and far-reaching. His inaction and indecisiveness contributed to the nation's descent into civil war, highlighting the critical role of presidential leadership in shaping the course of history. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, is often celebrated for his leadership during the Civil War and his role in ending slavery. However, his presidency was not without controversy. particularly regarding his actions to curtail freedom of speech and press during the war. In an effort to maintain national security and support the war effort, Lincoln took measures that limited civil liberties, including the suspension of habeas corpus and the suppression of dissenting newspapers. These actions, while intended to preserve the Union, raised contentious questions about the balance between presidential powers and individual freedoms. Lincoln's decision to curtail freedom of speech was driven by the belief that the survival of the nation was at stake. However, these measures were met with significant opposition and criticism, as many viewed them as an overreach of executive authority. The suppression of dissent during the Civil War also had lasting implications for the nation's understanding of civil liberties. Lincoln's actions set precedents for future presidents, highlighting the delicate balance between protecting national security and upholding constitutional rights. Andrew Johnson, the 17th president, assumed office after Lincoln's assassination. His presidency was marked by his lenient approach to Reconstruction and support for the Black Codes. These laws restricted the freedoms of newly emancipated African Americans. Johnson's opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1866 hindered efforts to secure equal rights. His policies entrenched systemic inequalities that persisted for decades. Ulysses S. Grant, the 18th President of the United States, is often remembered for his efforts to combat corruption and his support for civil rights during Reconstruction. However, his presidency also included controversial decisions, such as his support for the Comstock laws, which aimed to regulate morality by restricting the distribution of obscene materials. The Comstock laws, named after their chief proponent, Anthony Comstock, were a series of federal statutes that prohibited the mailing of obscene, lewd, or lascivious materials, including information about contraception and abortion. Grant's support for these laws was driven by a desire to promote moral behavior and protect public decency. However, the Comstock laws had significant implications for individual freedoms and privacy. They were used to suppress not only pornography, but also legitimate medical and educational materials, leading to widespread censorship and the curtailment of constitutional rights. Grant's support for the Comstock laws highlights the complexities of balancing moral oversight with the protection of civil liberties. While well-intentioned, these laws ultimately infringed on individual freedoms and set troubling precedents for government intervention in personal matters. Rutherford B. Hayes, the 19th president, is remembered for ending Reconstruction. His decision to withdraw federal troops from the South marked the end of Reconstruction. This was part of the Compromise of 1877, resolving the disputed 1876 election. The end of Reconstruction led to Jim Crow laws and widespread discrimination. James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, served only a few months before his tragic assassination. Garfield's presidency is often remembered for the lax security measures that ultimately led to his untimely death, highlighting the essential nature of rigorous security for national leaders. Garfield's assassination by Charles J. Guiteau, a disgruntled office seeker, underscored the vulnerabilities and dangers faced by public officials. The lack of adequate security and protection for the president exposed significant flaws in the nation's approach to safeguarding its leaders. The tragic events surrounding Garfield's assassination led to increased awareness and efforts to improve security measures for future presidents. His death served as a catalyst for changes in how the nation approached the protection of its leaders, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and preparedness. Garfield's brief presidency and tragic fate also highlighted the broader challenges of political patronage and the need for civil service reform. His assassination underscored the dangers of a system that allowed unqualified and disgruntled individuals to seek government positions through patronage. The missteps of U.S. presidents are lessons for future generations. They remind us that no leader is infallible. Let us remember the importance of learning from history. The mistakes of the past guide us toward better decision-making. Let us carry forward the lessons of the past, striving for a united nation.